So let's start with Nancy Guthrie. How is it possible in a world with all of the surveillance cameras, with the DNA and all the different databases and everybody watching, how is it possible that this happened and it has not been solved?
I've been asking that question since about day 2 of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, because in my experience of investigating and prosecuting violent crimes, all felonies, many of them dealing with fingerprint, DNA analysis. Of course, I tried many, many cases before the perfection of the study of deoxyribonucleic acid. I've been wondering, how is this happening? And I myself have referred to the porch guy, as I dubbed him, as an idiot. Because how do you think that grabbing foliage could destroy what's already been captured on the door cam? However, maybe he's crazy like a fox, because he has certainly outwitted, well, not only Nanos' department, which I don't think is that hard to do, but the FBI. Now, I, like many Americans, hate the federal government, but that said, they really know what they're doing. On about 36 hours into it, I called on a former member of, a founding member of CAST, C-A-S-T, the Cellular Analysis Survey Team, an elite crew within the FBI, as to what they should be doing, what they are doing, what they have already done. And that is a data dump, of course, of all the cell phones in and out of the area. How the perp was wily enough to turn off a cell phone, that's pretty smart. Now, I've tried airplane mode. I've tried the concept, which has worked in the past, of capturing, you have Uconnect in your car, that touches on cell as it's driving by, trying to attach to Wi-Fi. An iPad on your floorboard that's still on, anything, a smartwatch, anything that has connectivity can be picked up. Here's the thing, it's not fast enough, because they will get tens of thousands of hits on that data dump. Analyzing it, there's a crew on the ground, I've been told, and a crew in Quantico analyzing all that information. How this guy has managed to evade that, I don't know.
So let me ask you this. Who do you think did this?
I do, for one reason, and one reason only, I do not believe the Guthrie family is responsible. Because, although it was many years ago that I first met Savannah Guthrie, she is, I'd like to assure you, not a fake TV person. They're horrible. They're so nice on TV, then they're crazy off the air. She's real. She is real, just like she is on TV. She's super smart. She's a trained lawyer. And I find it not just difficult, but impossible to believe that Savannah Guthrie would drape her arm around the brother-in-law and go visit. I mean, I remember the smell of the carnations at my fiance's funeral. Makes me sick even now. I can't stand to smell it. It's such a moment in your life that you never forget. She walked up to that flower memorial with her arm around the brother-in-law. And I just do not believe, I find it impossible to believe that Savannah would do that if she suspected he was involved. And for that reason alone, I mean, you all know, you're true crime legal eagles, aficionados, that you look at the family first. Of course you do, because statistically that's who did it.
We're going to move on to Jeffrey Epstein.
Ugh.
So, were you surprised by the volume of powerful people that were in those emails repeatedly?
Frankly, no. When you don't know a horse, look at his track record. Who hung out with Epstein? Rich, powerful people with a lot of influence and prestige. Did they know what Epstein was doing? Probably not. Maybe. Hey, You're a guy, probably married. You go to an Epstein party, and there's all these women around, and you get with one, or you flirt with one. You think nobody's ever going to find out. That's a far cry from molesting a child. So I take everything I read with a box of salt. And look at who were at his dinner parties. Famous politicians, wealthy people, famous actors. So I was not surprised at all. Once I started reading the content of some of them, they sickened me. Like Andrew and Fergie, disgusting. I mean, they're some of the wealthiest people in the world, and they're like pigs at the effing trough. And they had to go to Epstein for money? I mean, that's like hopping in bed with the devil and liking it. So, yeah, I was disgusted at some of the emails, but not surprised at it seemed like Epstein collected stars of every walk of life.
So let's talk about this client list, because first, Pam Bondi, our AG, said that the client list is on my desk. Then she said there is no client list. Is there a list? What is this about a list?
Bombshell, there is no client list. But have no fear. That's just like when I start the prosecution of a felony. I don't have a witness list yet. AP doesn't say, hey, here's your witness list for your trial. I have to work for it. I have to read every document. I have to speak to everybody I know about the case. I have to go visit the crime scene. And guess what? I find witnesses. I find defendants. That's how you create the witness list. I spoke with multiple Epstein victims, now adults. And when people say the word closure, I did that unintentionally, roll my eyes, because there is no such thing as closure when you are a victim of violent crime. They know who their attackers were. That's where you're going to find your client list. In that, speaking with the victims, if the feds are bothering to do that, and combing through every document. If you've got your heart in it, it's not exhausting, it's not boring, it's not tiresome. You look forward to every document. I know I did and do. That's how you create the witness list, the client list, so to speak.
Tyson Wrensch, you were the victim of a crime, and you've since made it your mission to spread the word about what happened to you so it doesn't happen to other people. It was the subject of a podcast. There was a Dateline episode about it. Can you talk about how you went about, taking out your megaphone and making sure people knew about this?
Yeah, it was pretty organic. I would tell, I'd go to dinners and people would say, Tyson, tell your story. And I'm like, you heard the story. They're like, no, to tell it again. And I realized, first of all, I had to get over the shame of being a victim. And then I realized, I'm not, shame is not the feeling to have, I'm human. And the fact is, I'm not a reporter. I'm a tech sales guy from Silicon Valley, right? And I did everything right in life. I was raised white picket fence. And this was truly the first moment of betrayal. And, it's a wild story where I was, I had gotten laid off and I got a really nice severance package. So I said, I'm going to go to South America, and 3 weeks into my trip, I'm going to take you back to 2007, before the iPhone, before Facebook. So don't think I was that dumb. But 3 weeks into my trip, I realized all my bank accounts were empty. And then I flew home unannounced, and someone had moved into my house. And it turns out that it was my best friend of 5 years. So turns out he was a con man. And but what con people love, and then that's when they win, is they win in silence. And so I realized I had to be the one to release that shame, victim shaming, and just come out and tell the story. And it turns out it's a really crazy story. So I ended up finding a lady. I don't know how to write a book, so I found a lady who had written some true crime books, and we spent 3 years putting this together, because the trial took that long. They represented themselves as their own attorneys, and they conned the state of California into giving them each $1 million to help them with their defense. It was also a no-body homicide, so we didn't have the body. Basically, the victim in this homicide they did exactly to him what they did to me. And so we put the book out, and then a month later, the wonderful folks at ID called to my surprise, and they're like, we want to do a show. And I'm like, great, let's keep getting the word out. And that show came out, and a month later, ID called again. They're like, we want to do another show. And I said, that's great. And then we got our convictions, and everything was over. But then the convictions got overturned due to the judge.
It wasn't good what he said.
It wasn't good. Yeah. So anyway, I'll shut up. But it's yeah. So then Dateline called because suddenly there was another murder, and it just it's kind of happened by itself. But the story just needs to be told, because while these guys are in jail, there are more people out there like them, and any of you could be sitting here. And if you don't think you're going to be a victim, somebody is going to target you at some point, and that's just the way that's just the way things are.
Natalie, you alluded to this earlier, but sometimes in this field, you're interviewing people who you wouldn't choose to speak with in the normal course of your day. And on 48 Hours, we see you door-stopping people who may or may not have perpetrated a heinous crime, and definitely don't want to speak to you. What are some things what are some tricks you've learned over the years to figure out how to investigate?
Well, it's interesting because I just learned this term yesterday watching an episode that's coming soon on 48 Hours, but science-based interviewing. It's what FBI profilers do. In a lot of ways, I was talking to Tracy Smith, my colleague, who has this upcoming 48 Hours episode, and she was the one who, said, and in this episode that she has, this FBI profiler talked about the need to talk to people at a level, whether it's a convicted killer, accused killer, a victim, survivor, is you assume nothing. You walk in that room and you just want them to feel like they can speak to you. And it really is just letting go of any preconceived notions. You almost basically have to dumb down the conversation. Like, you haven't heard anything about this crime, you haven't heard anything about this case, but let's start from the very beginning. What happened here? And in that way, it's interesting because if you're talking to a convicted killer, sometimes they want to lead you down that road pretty quickly. There's sometimes almost, I remember one case where a man who, this was a former Dateline that I did though, but he had been accused and had been convicted. It took many, many years, it was a cold case, but finally convicted of murdering a woman that turns out was the best friend's sister. And took them a long time to figure out that he was the guy. He only served 12 years in Texas, by the way, Stephenville, Texas. Only served 12 years because he became an informant on another case. So, long story short, I'm sitting across from him. He looks like Santa Claus as he comes in. He's got a big white beard. He's kind of a chubby old, you would think, and he's a grandpa. He's got his grandkid in the other room, in the green room. But yet I know the nature of what he did. And it wasn't just that one victim. There was another woman who got away. And knowing that, going into that room, of course, I am like, chilled to the bone thinking about how he left that woman because I had seen the crime scene photos. And I know there's a responsibility to the victim's family. But I also have to engage with somebody. And I was scared. Let me tell you, I was scared. I had security. I'm like, make sure he doesn't know where I live or where I'm going after this interview. And there are people who do, you get prison mail and stuff. People follow you. I'm sure you've all dealt with your share of that. But it really is just listening and engaging in a way that you're trying not to necessarily throw everything out that you know, but just taking it all in and then you go back for more.
Call of Duty this year was a case that was very loudly covered. But before that, something like Quiet on Set was a lot of things that people didn't know. So how did your approach differ for the two projects?
Thank you, Emily. Listen, I think we are always interested in centering the accounts of those who were most impacted. So those who are on the front lines, we pursue revelation. And that's a constant across both projects. With Quiet on Set, there was a curiosity that sparked our initial investigation. Jason and the wonderful folks at ID came on board very quickly. Jason was an incredibly passionate supporter of the project who understood immediately the potential inherent in the material and our approach. And we started at the outside. So you build your spreadsheets, you build your list of contacts, you build your timelines, and you work from the outside in. And at every interval, you are working to create and foster trust. And I think I've been thinking a lot about trust these days. I spend so much of my days engaged in this exercise of fostering and building trust with the people who we are asking to entrust their, most wrenching, most important, most significant stories. We're asking them to hand these over to us. And I think when you're fostering trust, there's no shortcut to it necessarily. I think some of it is an intuitive connection. I think previous work means so very much, and I'm so lucky to have been working with the folks at ID now across several projects. And now when I'm in conversations about building trust with contributors, they look at these previous works. So they look at Quiet on Set, and they look at The Fall of Diddy, and they say, I see that your treatment of your contributors was sensitive, and I see the cultural impact that those works had, and so I'm ready to come to you. So in both cases, we start with the people who are at the center of it. We work to build trust. We listen to what they have to say it, and then we think about what is the honest essence of the story that we need to tell.
Can you talk about just how you got into this business, like how that happened?
Sure, thank you. And thank you all for being here today. Yes, it sort of fell backwards into it. I was in the military. I was a Navy SEAL from 2010 to 2017, and it takes a lot of time and energy to become a Navy SEAL, and so I anticipated having a whole career in the military, like 20 years, get my retirement. That didn't happen. I was hurt in Afghanistan, ultimately got medically retired, which in a way was sort of a blessing in disguise. Honestly, like the life of being a Navy SEAL was very different than I thought it would be. Like the training is prolific, and it's this famous training you go through. It takes like 2 years. And in some ways, it was like that was what I was probably seeking more than like being an actual SEAL. Is like, could I make it through training? Once you get into the teams, it's like you live at the team. Your life is, I'm married, I got kids, but like I spent virtually all of my time either training, deployed, or like at the team waiting to do one of those two things. So I got medically retired, but the retirement happened sort of abruptly. I knew it was going to happen, but they told me I'd be retired like in a year. And then they were like, just kidding, you're retired in like a day. And I hadn't planned for a job or anything, and so I sort of was thrust into the civilian world with really no sense of what to do. Even though I had like a little bit of money coming in with the retirement, it wasn't enough to sustain a wife and kids. So for a couple of years, I sort of just like did random consulting and some charity work, didn't really have a purpose. And then naturally I was like, why don't I post a strange, dark, and mysterious story on TikTok? That'll work out. That's sort of how it went. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I happened to be really into like strange, true stories. I mean, that's the gist of our channel is strange mysteries, strange, dark, and mysterious. On a whim, I posted a story about the Dyatlov Pass mystery, which is this crazy mystery about these missing hikers in Russia. It was right before the pandemic. This is like early 2020. I'm at this water park with my wife and kids, Great Wolf Lodge in Pennsylvania, for anyone who knows. Great spot for kids.
When you know,
Great
you know.
experience. Maybe they're here, But I post this video sort of ad hoc. I have no following, nothing, but I just thought it was really interesting. I thought social media was a good place to throw your hat in the ring. Maybe something takes off. I post it. I go down the water park, which is indoors. I left my phone in the hotel room, and I came back a couple hours later, and there was 5 million views on this story. Admittedly, I didn't think, boy, I've found my calling. It was just like a huge ego stroke to feel like I had told a story that people liked. And I love telling those types of stories, so I just iterated, and I sort of channeled my inner Navy SEAL and obsessively made content, drove myself to borderline alcoholism just because all I could do was make stories and do nothing else. And so it ultimately paid off and turned into a whole thing. And now I tell scary stories for a living, the natural path.
Ask about the ethics of true crime. You're obviously dealing with stories that involve real victims, real families. What are the specific things that you need to be cautious of, and what is the responsibility of telling these stories?
I think you have to lead with respect. I mean, whoever they are, right? As a journalist, so many of the true crime stories that I've covered, I still am friendly with the characters of those stories. You'll see me commenting on their Instagrams. I text them when I have questions. Before I came to this panel, I called Joe Petito, was like, how do you feel about true crime? Because I struggle with it as a business idea that I'm profiting in some way telling these stories, that I have a career and a job because of it. And he was very interesting because he told me I needed to be exploited to get answers to what happened to my daughter. And I didn't care what happened as long as I knew I had some sort of conclusion. And there are people out there who never get that conclusion. I can think of 2 cases that have stayed with me that I've covered: Lauren Spear in Indiana, Kyle Fleischman in Charlotte, who those families still to this day don't know what happened to their children. And so you have to think about how what you put out there in the world comes back to them years later. You have to be honest with them about what it is you're doing and how they may or may not feel about it. Joe told me that the person who did the doc with him told him he wasn't going to like it. He was certain that they weren't going to like it, but he made a deal with him that this, and this are the things that I want to come out of it, and as long as I get those things, I'll be okay. And they got that out of the doc, and that's what they wanted. And I think those are the sort of uncomfortable conversations you have to have with people. Is everyone going to love the work that you do? Not always. Are you doing it in a way that you're trying your best to be respectful? Yes. Do you always get it right? No. But, we're all human. And as long as you're having that dialogue, I think, it all works itself out in the end.
Well, I think most of the time, a lot of what we've always found is that so many of the families of victims, they really want, like you were saying, they want answers, or they just want people to understand what was lost here. Because I think one of the things that we all do, we're always very respectful ultimately of the victims. And we want to bring those victims to life through our storytelling. And I think by doing that, we end up honoring them quite a bit. And again, like I said, in a way, just making sure that the people who are consuming this, they really understand the gravity of the crime and what was taken away. And I think, we always, everything we do is victim focused. And we want to make sure that's at the heart of all of the projects that we're at.
And also the longevity of the impact. I think one of the things that true crime presents is it happened on a day. And then for years and years and years and years, you're in active investigation, you're dealing with trials. And I think being able to remind people that the impact is so much more than the day that the thing happened is something they greatly value. And yeah.
For people who aren't aware, I want to give you to give a little bit of a synopsis, because if people aren't aware of what the Red Weather is about and kind of that story.
Okay, so the Red Weather it begins with, I receive a letter from a girl that I grew up with, who is my age now, and I find out that she had committed suicide after she sent me the letter. And in the letter, she says we can finally tell the truth about what happened in 1995. And what that sends me on is an investigation into the disappearance of her sister, which happened in 1995. And I am now empowered by her, even though she's dead. I feel empowered to go back and finally try and get to the bottom of whether her sister just ran away or whether something more nefarious happened. And so in the process of going back to my hometown and interviewing my friends who were there with me that night, and my parents and my brother, and then in the current context, I have my wife and my real son. So there's a lot of documentary interviews and documentary stuff, and then a lot of scripted stuff inserted. So the result is, hopefully a very realistic sounding fake true crime.
Yeah.
What we see now is that a lot of the criminals know the process, right? So the alarm goes off, the home security company calls the police, and the police take time. Even in the best case scenarios, it could be 10 minutes before the police even get there. So they break into a house, they know it's going to be 10 minutes, you take as much stuff as you can in 9 minutes, get in the car, and get out of there. What we are finding is that if we can get a human involved earlier, we can actually stop things much more quickly. As you saw in those videos, when the agent comes online and says, hey, you're being monitored and recorded, I'm dispatching the police, or I'm informing the homeowner, that's just a complete break in the system for these criminals. In fact, there was one circumstance where we have a service where our agents actually come and talk to anybody who's in the house during an alarm. And so there was a burglar who had broken into this home, and he was rummaging through the property, and the alarm was going off, and he was like, this is great, I got 10 minutes, I'm going to do my thing, get out of here, and all will be good. But then our agent comes on and says, hey, this is SimpliSafe, you don't belong here, I am calling the police. I kid you not, the guy got so scared, he jumped out of the window that he had broken into to get into the house. So again, we minimized the damage in that, and this was before we actually had the service that you saw the video for. So we actually averted that situation, or prevented it from getting worse, if you will.
Rachel, My Brother's Killer is about the previously unsolved 1990 murder of Bill Newton, who went by Billy London, and who was killed in West Hollywood, a murder that became the stuff of urban legend because it was gruesome, and because he was a gay adult actor. Can you talk about how the movie came together?
Well, I grew up in this area where Billy was murdered, and in fact I made a film about sort of my childhood through the lens of the store that my parents operated for 40 years called Circus of Books. And this film was in the center of the gay community. And I grew up knowing and loving all of these wonderful gay men without really understanding what they had gone through and the ordeal, the incredible ordeal. I'm wearing the AIDS Memorial shirt, you can see, because AIDS, when it happened, was so unthinkably brutal. Just a wave of people died. And it was a true epidemic that also was not being handled well on any level by our government and by society. And yet, when I did Circus of Books, I was able to uncover a whole historical moment that I just started to become more and more attached to, partially because as they call it, I'm a huge fag hag. I just love gay men. I could be around gay guys all day long, and these are my friends, they're my people. I started to understand what they went through, though. Guys who survived any man who's gay, who's over 50, immediately knows what that era was like. So when I heard about Bill's murder, this horrific murder that happened in 1990, in the heart of the community, at the time when AIDS was happening, I just couldn't let it go, and it felt so personal and so painful to me because, it's very easy to kind of gloss this, call somebody a gay porn star and be like, okay, well, this crazy thing happened. And I would sort of see that narrative, even in the press as it was then. And it just felt so important to get deeper and deeper and deeper into the story. And truthfully, I started the film thinking maybe it's possible to create like a portrait of the victim. And at least we could get to know a person on a more three-dimensional level, so he wasn't always just this sort of like caricature of the most depraved urban legend myth. But working on the film over a period of years and getting to know the people, like the victim's lover, who is here, by the way, my dear friend Mark Rabins, and also the people, I started to become friends with everybody. We, over time as a community, started to piece together the story. And so this film details how a community, totally as a community, came together to solve the murder. And the murder did get solved.
I was going to say, I mean, the community around the movie solved the crime, and I won't say who done it, so because people need to watch it. At one point, Jeffrey Dahmer is a suspect, which I was like, whoa, that would be a turn. So when did you realize we might solve this?
You know, there's so many moments along the way. Actually, Jeffrey Dahmer was a very huge part of the story. Initially, in 1990, when Dahmer was brought in and finally, called up for his crimes in Milwaukee, he was the cops from all over the country were sending in information to find out any other dismembered man who might be a connection, and he actually was questioned about Billy in LA. And we have an archival letter from the Milwaukee Police Department saying, we've questioned Jeffrey Dahmer. And I saw that and I thought, oh my God, so Jeffrey Dahmer was asked about our victim. And because of that one thread, which came about because of a podcast, the podcast by Christopher Rice and Eric Shaw Quinn that we feature in our film, it led to somebody coming forward with this tip. And I can't get into all the details here, but that tip really sparked every single thread throughout the film that led to us solving it.
I didn't want to do it at all, and I turned it down twice, as you know, because it was a well-known story, and the last thing that I thought was necessary was that the world needed more serial killer shows. I've done a couple of them already, but it ultimately was when we discovered that we could tell the story of the victims and really just give their backstories in a way that was completely disconnected from John Wayne Gacy, from their abduction, from their assaults, rapes, and murders, that it gave a reason, to your point, it gave a reason to actually tell the story. And it's interesting because at this point in time, I can now look back a little bit on, now we've got a little bit of space from when it's come out, and I've seen some of the data, and I've obviously, it was critically acclaimed, but one of my fears in doing it that way was that people were not going to want to watch it because it wasn't going to have the typical gratuitous or salacious eye on the storytelling. And I'm currently writing the second season about the Night Stalker right now, and I did discover some things that you have to kind of find. I have to find a little bit more balance as I go into season 2.
Yeah.
That audiences definitely respected it. They definitely engaged with it, but I think that people still want some of that.
Yeah.
You know.
I was going to ask you, going into the second season, I mean, has it changed your approach at all? It
has.
Yeah.
It has. Yeah, but not in a way that I think people are going to who were fans of the first season. I don't think that they're going to see it as a 180-degree turn at all. But I think that we very purposefully the first season avoided kind of diving into the psyche of Gacy, except for one episode. We're leaning a little bit more into the psyche of Richard Ramirez, but it has an interesting link to it. Or at least I hope it's interesting. We'll find out. I'm a little biased that we really are going to be focusing on Boyle Heights and the East LA community and the Latino community and what impact this case had on obviously the city, but specifically this neighborhood, and that's sort of, in our opinion, going to be the victim story of the second season, is focusing it on the Latino community and what it was like to be a part of it at that time. But we definitely are. I mean, the pilot is, I've written it. It's got a lot going on in the true crime, what people traditionally like in true crime.
Very early on in the process of making this series, we sort of said to the producers who were out casting, stop finding me what you think are good stories and start finding me people who can tell good stories. People who have an honest story to tell. They're authentic. They don't have to have done it before. It doesn't necessarily have to be a famous story. I'm interested in hearing people who can tell the story. And you don't have to convince me from the first phone call with them that they can tell the story.
Yeah.
You have to develop a relationship. So I think we started just looking at how do we get honest stories told with people who want to tell them, and we started establishing relationships with people. And some of those ended up being serial killer shows. Some of those ended up being just, a husband gone crazy. Some of them ended up being someone killing their whole family. But the common thread to the series is just that it's a POV interview and someone has an honest story to tell. And it's that simple. I mean, it's incredibly difficult, but it's that simple.
How do you go about kind of not only finding the stories, but also finding the people that you speak to throughout the process?
The stories more so now come to us, and I think we have kind of the bar is, would we want to listen to it? And I think if you're going to be in a creative space, you have to believe that you have good taste, right? So you kind of make what you would want to listen to, and you hope that that's what your audience also wants to listen to. In the very beginning, my business partner, Payne, he found a case in South Georgia, and it was really about finding an open case that was close enough for him to drive to. And that was the bar. And he was able to drive to South Georgia, look into this case, and ultimately help lead to 2 arrests. The podcast is called Up and Vanished. But I think a good example of choosing a case and choosing a host that matches is, you find what you're passionate about. Our second podcast, I was really passionate about the Atlanta child murders, even though I'm from California and I was not even born when the first murders occurred, but I still heard about this, and it scared me as a child. And then my business partner, Payne, he's 10 years younger than me, and he's white, and he had no clue about these murders, and they happened to all, young black children in Atlanta. And we ended up telling this story through his lens as a millennial white guy, which I don't know if we could do today, but the reason we did it that way is because we approached it from a position of ignorance. He had no idea that this was happening. Why, right? Why did his community not know, but my community was devastated, right? So it's really just this mix and match of who is the best storyteller for the lens that you're trying to tell that story through. You could tell that story 10 times, 10 different ways, and all be great, but that was just the way that we decided to tell it.